The true heiress looked down on the garden I cultivated, sneering that I was poor and lacked sophistication. She even fawned over my biological parents and brother, claiming that she had only carelessly destroyed the flowers because she liked them so much. She thought she was picking ordinary blooms, unaware that they were precious, meticulously cultivated varieties from our Agricultural Research Institute, the only ones of their kind in the entire world. I watched as the black lotus she had plucked was pinned onto her haute couture dress. Sophie, as radiant as a swan, twirled gracefully before my parents. "Mom, Dad, look at me. Do I look pretty?" The crowd murmured in awe at Sophie's elegance. She truly is the real daughter of the Su family. Such innate grace. In my past life, angered by the picking of the twin black lotuses, I had pushed Sophie to the ground in front of everyone. In a cruel twist of fate, the glass she held slipped, the shards digging deep into her hand. Blood welled up, a gruesome sight. "Mom, my hand." My mother shoved me to the floor. "Sophie's hands are meant to play the piano. You, the fake, could never compensate for ruining them." My brother, his eyes full of hatred, glared at me because of Sophie's injury. They rushed Sophie to the hospital, where she underwent wound cleaning and stitching because of the embedded glass fragments. My parents, utterly disappointed in me, sent me back to the mountains. To avenge the real heiress's injury, my brother had people sever the tendons in my hands and feet. He then set fire to the orchard my biological parents had nurtured. In their efforts to prevent the wildfire from spreading, my parents were engulfed in flames, their bodies charred. In despair, I drank poison, ending my life. As my soul floated free, I realized that everything had been a scheme by Sophie. She had intentionally crushed the glass in her hand and bribed the doctor. At my grave, she burned all the evidence, her face alight with triumphant glee. "This is the price you pay for enjoying the life that was meant for me." Yet, she had been equally pampered as a little princess in my biological parents' home. When I opened my eyes again, I was back at the recognition banquet. Seeing the black lotus she had just plucked, I called Professor Jiang. "Hey, old Jiang, it's me. Take your senior students and come dig up those things in my little garden. Be here within half an hour, or I might change my mind." When Professor Jiang arrived, Sophie was taking off the slightly wilted flower. She tossed it carelessly onto a table, and the sight made Professor Jiang's eyes widen in horror. His senior students immediately erupted in fury. "What have you done?" I quickly covered my ears. When Professor Jiang's voice became enraged, I could feel my internal organs trembling. With a broken heart, he picked up the twin black lotus, looking at me as if searching for confirmation. I nodded grimly. Yes, it was the same lotus he had asked for countless times, the one I had stubbornly refused to give him. He seemed to understand, and along with his senior students, their gazes at Sophie were filled with intense anger. My brother recognized Professor Jiang, a pioneer whose cultivation techniques had revolutionized Chinese agriculture. He frowned. "I apologize, Professor Jiang. Today is my sister's homecoming party. We can discuss this later." "Discuss what?" "This is not something that can be discussed." Professor Jiang saw clearly that the Su family was trying to intimidate his beloved student. "It's just a flower, isn't it? Mr. Su, surely you're overreacting," Sophie said, putting on an innocent act. "Little sister, I know you nurtured these flowers. If you like them, I'll buy you 999 bouquets," she cooed. "Lotus flowers may be elegant, but they're not exactly priceless. You see them all the time. In our tea ceremony and flower arranging classes, at most a few dollars each." She turned to me, a gentle smile on her face, her grace contrasting sharply with my apparent unreasonable behavior. The guests began to whisper. "Yes, it's the real daughter of the Su family's return. This fake daughter has been living in her place for so long, and is making things difficult for Ms. Su because of a flower. Fake is fake. She makes such a fuss about a flower. So uncouth." The guests' comments became increasingly offensive. Professor Jiang, overhearing them, turned red with fury. "Compensation? How will you compensate? Do you know this was a mother plant our university has been cultivating for 10 years? That it took me and Yo-Yo 3 years to get it to bloom? More importantly, this is the only twin black lotus in the entire world. The research potential of its seeds, once they naturally fall, is immeasurable. And you've just destroyed it. This is an incalculable loss for our university, for all of China. Professor Jiang, his voice shaking with rage, pointed at my brother. This is your sister's hard work. What can you compensate? Can your mountains of stinking money make 999 twin black lotus blooms grow? If so, I'll pretend I said nothing. He finally understood that his talented protege was not well received in this circle. My brother looked at me, his face darkening. His voice was full of blame. Yo-Yo, stop making a scene. If you don't want to be thrown back to your mountains, take them and leave, my father threatened. But I had died once and witnessed their ruthlessness and indifference. Their words no longer held any power over me. In my past life, I was dumped into the mountains, paralyzed and despised, but my biological parents never abandoned me and took good care of me. I laughed coldly at the Sioux couple. All these years of taking care of them meant nothing compared to the few weeks they spent with Sophie. In my past life, my brother had hired people to hurt me, and then started a fire to cover up the truth. They had done everything they could to protect him. All these years I had devoted to my studies, escaping all the courses my mother arranged for me. I had entered the best agricultural research institute in China, spending every day researching flowers and plants, with many achievements but still receiving not even a glance of recognition. I had even heard that they planned to sell me off as a tool for political marriage as soon as I graduated. I could only desperately write papers, do research, and win awards, attempting to find value and seek protection. Fortunately, I had caught Professor Zhang's eye and became one of his protégés. I had finally breathed a sigh of relief, only for Sophie to come back. I smiled. Since she wanted to be this distinguished lady, let her be. I just hoped that in the end she wouldn't regret it. I looked at my parents, a sweet smile on my face. I can go back to my mountains. But I'm going to take what is mine. Don't worry, I won't take anything that belongs to the Sioux family. I signaled my senior students to head towards my garden. It's just a pile of your broken flowers and vegetables. Just take it and leave. You've made the yard such a mess. It's so dirty. Such a random collection. No aesthetic sense at all. My mother eyed me with disgust, wishing she could send the whole mess of flowers along with me away. I smiled as I opened the door to my garden. Some curious guests followed behind. But after seeing the plants, they gasped in shock. That's a ghost orchid and a great Tang phoenix feather. And a Juliet rose. My God, it's blooming so beautifully. Isn't that a silver thread canopy? Even in Luoyang, which is famous for peonies, there's only one, heavily guarded, and here's another one. That chili. Oh my God. I know it. A carapita. It's tens of thousands of dollars per pound. Even my well-traveled senior students were stunned. The plants in our junior sister's garden were worth a fortune. Professor Zhang's hand trembled. Yo-Yo, you really intend to let us take all this back? I glanced at the Sioux family, whose jaws were nearly on the floor. In their eyes, they're just broken flowers. My senior students gave me these seeds, and I tried to grow them. Leaving them here will only cause them to meet the same fate as the twin black lotus. I motioned toward the table. This is all I have in the Sioux family. In the past, after resisting my parents' arrangements, they cut off all of my financial support, trying to force me to submit. My parents seemed to want to say something, but I cut them off. I projected the detailed bills of my expenses over the past decade onto a screen. I looked at them. This twin black lotus is priceless. No need for compensation. Let this be the end of my association with the Sioux family. All these years, I was able to survive on scholarship money and selling a small portion of the flowers and plants I had grown. The guests whispered among themselves, realizing they were witnessing an extraordinary drama. The money the Sioux family's adopted daughter spent in the past 10 years is probably less than the cost of this banquet. You're mistaken, she's had a hard time, refusing to listen to her parents. Sophie tried to argue, but no one was listening. My Sioux parents could only watch as their nearly $1 million garden was moved away. It was clear they were in pain, but they didn't dare protest. In the last life, Sophie framed me publicly, making it impossible to defend myself. But the eyes of the public are sharp, and their strength is immense. After ensuring my plants were properly settled, I said goodbye to my professor. Child, you've been wronged. Professor Zhang wiped away tears. He could see that no one in the Su family was good. It's okay, Professor. The soil is better in the mountains. I might even be able to get the black lotus to bloom again. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to let me know. In my eyes, you are like my own granddaughter. Professor Zhang waved his hand, taking my words as a form of bittersweet consolation. But what I said was true. The mountains where my biological parents lived was a treasure trove. For an agricultural student, it was simply paradise. And the Su family home that Sophie was returning to was a living hell. I had been escaping for over a decade. If it weren't for her rash return as the true heiress, I might never have escaped that abyss. But the entire family was a demon. And when you are targeted by demons, just escaping is not enough. In this life, they must be punished. Sophie felt that the Shun family parents were mistreating her, making her read books from morning to night. They made her pick fruit in the morning and irrigate the fields, pushing her to study hard. In my past life, when she had returned to the Su family, she cried to the media, claiming that she didn't even own a single princess dress. In the flower of her youth, she was forced to live like an old woman. My eyes darkened. That ungrateful wretch. When my biological mother was injured, after finding out that her blood type didn't match her, the first thing she did was go to the city to investigate the circumstances of that time, and discovered that the Su family daughter had been born on the same day. She then began to hate the Shun family and to hate me. She believed that I had stolen her life, living in luxury for over a decade instead of her. But she did not know that my parents had been genuinely devoted to nurturing her. I entered her room where everything was a luxury item. Her wooden bed was made of Phoebe-Janon wood. What she considered a stench was the scent of burning sandalwood. And the plain clothes that she despised were actually made of Tianluo gauze and Shuguang brocade, all of them top-tier luxuries in China. But Sophie was unable to recognize their worth. If she had simply read a little more, she would have understood. My parents were not just peasants, as she called them. They had their reasons. I observed the old items in the room. Each of them was priceless. The teacup used for water was of the sky blue roux kiln type. And the flowers Sophie had dismissed as gaudy were actually jade peonies that were worth their weight in gold. In my past life, I had never questioned my parents' true identity. I only knew that they were good to both daughters. They did not favor one over the other, nor did they hold any grudges over Sophie's abandonment. They were two quiet souls who simply enjoyed the rustic life. But Sophie destroyed everything. Dinner is ready. Shun's mother knocked gently on the door, interrupting my thoughts. I put the book down and walked out. On the dinner table were some home-cooked dishes. The food was balanced, colorful, and appetizing. The chicken and bamboo shoots were exceptionally delicious. The rice grains were round and plump. I couldn't resist eating bowl after bowl. Shun's mother smiled as she filled my bowl, and Shun's father looked at me with a satisfied gaze. I hadn't become resentful over the drastic change in lifestyle. She was a good child. He picked up his teacup, took a sip, and cleared his throat. Your mother and I cannot give you the kind of life you are used to. You might even have to help us with the crops. He looked at me with a complex expression. The old Sophie was okay, but this daughter, who had lived as a rich lady since birth, might not be able to endure hardship. But I quickly agreed, which surprised him. Taking care of crops was just professional practice for an agriculture student. After a long while, he smiled and took me to the medicinal and agricultural fields. When I saw the medicinal field, I stared in amazement. The dragon pattern grass and the purpurea flowers, things that even Professor Zhang couldn't grow after decades of effort, were growing in abundance here. If old Zhang was here, he would fall to the ground and kiss it. But Shun's father thought I was still trying to adjust. He was about to say, "If you want to return," when he was interrupted. I was already trembling with excitement as I walked into the medicinal field. In my previous life, my tendons had been severed, making it impossible for me to even leave the house. Looking at these plants, what more could an agricultural student ask for? There's also a greenhouse that we grow all kinds of things in, that needs watering every day, Shun's father said. Sensing that the situation was not going as planned, I looked at the fruits, vegetables, and medicinal plants. These were the all kinds of things? They were all top-grade products that would become sought-after luxury items if they were sold outside after simple processing. My eyes shone with a fierce light. 10 of the Su family would not be worth what was in Shan's father's fields. Dad, you are too humble. I mean your daughter is very happy to help out. I changed my name back to Shin Yaoguang. I was happy these days. The fresh mountain air, the delicious food, and the daily work made my body healthy. There were still several days before the start of the semester. The Shin parents were much better to me than the Su's. In that short time I had become stronger. The Shin parents were happy. They smiled with satisfaction while looking at their well-tended plants. She's a diligent girl, Shin's mother said, patting my head with a smile. She suddenly looked surprised at a corner of the wall. I thought the way purple peony had withered, but it survived. It's all Yo-Yo's doing. You better not water it haphazardly next time, or I will have to go dig one up again for you, Shun's father complained, and I covered my mouth and giggled. The sunset stretched our shadows long. This time I would protect the Shun family and watch Sophie rot in that hellhole of a home. Before I could even seek her out, Sophie came looking for me. The village wasn't very big. When my brother and Sophie drove into the village in a flashy car and started honking the horn, everyone in the village was alerted. She seemed pleased, calling out as she carried large bags of gifts. Mom, Dad, I've come to see you. But Shun's mother only gave a perfunctory hum. She had been abandoned by Sophie that day, and she had seen her daughter's indifference. She had been unconscious at the time. Family members needed to sign to give permission for the operation. If Shun's father hadn't come, seeing that she hadn't gotten a warm welcome, she took out the things she had prepared with a smile. Mom, Dad, I brought gifts. She pulled out a pile of health products. These are all nutritional supplements from the Su family business. Good for beauty and strengthening the body. And these are international brand bracelets and necklaces. Mom, see if you like them. Dad, don't you like tea? I brought you some of the best tea. And this is some foreign wine. She was busy unloading the things. Oh yes, Yo-Yo, I bought you some imported fruit. You can't find these in the mountains. I watched her show off, while my parents looked at her with adoration. There were also some reporters who were brought along. I looked at them, a plan forming in my eyes. The Su family recently launched its health supplement products and was seeking collaborations. The Su family's reputation was very important. In the last life, they had used my body to build their good reputation. Everyone said that the Su family was tolerant and generous toward me. But in this life, no one expected me to voluntarily give up being a distinguished daughter and return to this village. They certainly didn't expect that the Su family's adopted daughter would be the most prized disciple of the famed agricultural professor Jiang. The reporters rushed into my home, shoving cameras in my face. The house is so shabby. It smells like dirt. The stench of the poor is impossible to conceal. My brother muttered. I glared at them coldly, thinking about how he started a fire in my past life. My eyes narrowed with determination. That mountain was not only the heart and soul of my parents, but also the home of countless plants with significant research value. Before I could retaliate, my mother gave them their eviction orders. But they still refused to leave. You're not welcome here, I said, stepping to the front. The reporters smelled a scandal and turned their cameras on me. I smiled, knowing that the camera was live. Sophie wanted to use the broadcast to show her good intentions and establish her family's image. However, the live broadcast chat was going wild. What did I just see? What was that flashed by in the yard? Wasn't that an extinct wrinkled jade fruit? And that amber heart on the vine? Those peonies at the door, are they Yao Huang and Wei purple? They're just planted at the door. If I remember correctly, the calligraphy on that plaque. It looks like the work of calligrapher Lin. Sure enough, the internet is all-knowing. It was the netizens who provided the evidence. My parents' identities were not as simple as they seemed. Sophie was living a blessed life and didn't realize it. When Sophie left, she was full of hatred. The netizens were already very clear. She wasn't a fool. Shun's father called out, "We don't need these." You can take them. My parents' faces darkened. They thought this family was ungrateful and stubborn. Sophie, let's go. We're not in the same class as them. My father left his snide comment with disdain. The rich just didn't know how to spend their money. Mountain people will always be mountain people and will never reach Rome. The reporters tried to take more photos, but my mother kicked them out. I'm sorry, but this is trespassing. My mother's ever-smiling eyes turned sharp for the first time. They had no choice but to leave. In this life, thanks to the media, my medicinal field was widely known. I thought that, even if my brother wanted to do something, he would be hunted by the whole country. As soon as Sophie left, Professor Jiang flew over from the city. My dear child, show this professor the trees in your yard. The young brats had woken him up, saying something about him seeing the Su family's live broadcast. He thought the kids had just gotten into an argument and needed him to use his public account to support them. These Sus were truly hateful. But when he tuned in, he saw something entirely different. How many good things was Yo-Yo hiding from him? I looked at the professor with a resigned look. He was shamelessly eating and drinking in my house for a week, under the pretense of doing academic research. He finally left satisfied, carrying away many branches and seeds. Watching his figure, I sighed. I had set up a few test fields here and planted all kinds of things for Professor Jiang. These small fields were state property. Professor Jiang had applied for research under his name. Because of this application, the state would allocate people to protect the fields. I was sure that even if my brother had 10 lives, he wouldn't dare to start a fire here. Soon it was time to start school again. Because of school, I had to return to the city. Mom, Dad, remember to water the treasures in my field. You, Shun's father said with a helpless sigh. Well, we did have to educate her in this way. I told you that wasn't a good idea. I just wanted to prevent her from developing bad habits. Shun's father scratched his head. But our Shun family child is special. She is much better than that heartless, ungrateful wolf. He quickly tried to make amends with my mother. He just wanted to use this method to test Yo-Yo like he tested his other daughter. And so they had continued living in the countryside. These hills and mountains belonged to the old family patriarch, who had always loved the land. It was where he had built his empire. They originally planned to bring Sophie back when she came of age and tell her she was the true daughter of the Shun family. But who knew that she was not from the Shun family bloodline and couldn't endure any testing? They had finally found their own daughter, and she had passed the test. They found out that she had loved planting and had great talent in the field. Those professional gardeners they hired to quietly tend to the plants were all impressed by her. We should tell the child about our identity now, my mother could not help but say. The child probably knows already. She's even found bodyguards for her precious test fields. She's calm and composed and doesn't get carried away. It's just that she loves planting. He rubbed his forehead, troubled by my passion for the farm life. At the start of the semester, my senior students pulled me aside. Yo-Yo, you are amazing. That black lotus can bloom again, although the twin black and white lotus is probably difficult. I laughed and handed them a bag of seeds. Senior brother, senior sister, what are these? The jade lotus at my house is the same type as the black lotus, and it just so happened to bloom a twin black and white one. It's such a pity for this year's flower exhibition. The twin black and white lotus would have definitely won. But junior sister, your silver thread peony is still spectacular. I smiled and shared the fruit I had grown at home. This is a jade melon. And amber yellow grapes? I handed them vines. Looking at my senior brothers, I said, use these to grow your own. We can eat as much as we want. Junior sister, what will the agricultural department do without you? I didn't expect Sophie to be at the flower exhibition. Looking at how much weight she had lost, my eyes flickered with a warning. Sophie's mother had not allowed her to have enough food. She had become slim and graceful. Her swan neck, right-angled shoulders, waist, and perfect curves were all on display. I couldn't help but sigh. These were all unhealthy changes. She gave me a smug look, as if she were a noble princess. Do you know, in a few days I am going to be engaged to the eldest son of the Mu family? I heard that he was originally your fiancé. But it's not meant to be. You can't force fate because fate is fair. Look, he bought me the tear of an angel. He made it into my engagement ring and said I was the most beautiful and gentle angel in the world. My heart filled with pity as I looked at her. Her white dress highlighted her perfect lines. She was like a well-dressed Barbie doll. I looked at her tightly cinched waist, grabbed a cream cake and took a big bite. Is this really the life you want? In order to maintain her figure, my mother would only allow me a small portion of rice each meal. Since childhood, I was forced to develop my figure. The school teachers told us that studying would change our fate. But my mother forced me to join a dance academy, even though my test scores were third in the city. When I signed up for college, I hid it from my mother and chose to study agriculture. When I got into the university, she was so angry that she kicked me out of the family. I was free that moment. Of course, I knew what she was planning. The Su family invested a lot in the health supplement industry, and the big boss in that field was the Mu family. Everyone in the circle knew that the Mu family's eldest son was not good. Mr. Mu had hidden his super male gene. Anyone with any sense avoided doing business with Mu-chan. He was volatile. Even the most shameless gold diggers wouldn't dare get close to him, no matter how generous he was. Several brave souls had been with Mu-chan and were hospitalized the next day. One of them even suffered permanent damage that could not be repaired. In the end, it was the Mu family's illegitimate son who revealed the secret. And that was none other than my own brother, who was obsessed with extracting the genes of different plants and animals. Sophie looked at me with jealousy. This is a flower exhibition, a hall of elegance. You really think you can attract attention with your country bumpkin flowers? She went to her exhibit, which was an elegant flower arrangement that she had carefully prepared. This is art, do you understand? I ignored her and went to my senior students. So, you're associating with the illegitimate son. Your sister is so low class. I wondered how you were qualified to enter this exhibition. It turns out that... She covered her mouth as if surprised. I was too lazy to deal with her. Sister, the pot calling the kettle black suits you very well. My brother came over to pull her away, signaling for her to explain the display. Sister, don't bother with that ingrate. Mr. Lin and Mr. Shin of the capital are coming. Okay, brother. The false show of brother-sister affection made me want to applaud. I hoped that when Sophie found out that the Su family had planned to sacrifice her to make way for my brother, she could still laugh. I looked at them with undisguised ridicule. My brother gave me a fierce glance and I stared back boldly. Your family's little eyes could never beat mine. However, the two elders sitting on the podium frowned when they saw Sophie's flower arrangement. This is a disgrace to the flowers. The lotus and chrysanthemums are only beautiful when they are on the branches. Mr. Lin and Mr. Shun were both flower lovers, and those who tended to flowers were most against cutting the flowers and putting them in vases for enjoyment. Lotuses were to be admired from afar, not to be played with, and chrysanthemums should rather wither on the branch than be taken. This was a big taboo. But worse, Sophie had shown off her skills in Japanese flower arrangement. I almost laughed. She wasn't just dancing on a minefield, she was firing off cannons. The two elders were beyond angry. I quickly asked my senior brothers and sisters to bring out the two plants that we had cultivated. The petals of the chrysanthemums looked like a phoenix spreading its wings, and the lotus was deeply beautiful. The two elders sat up, rubbing their hands. Junior sister, this can bring in the research funds? These two old men look like they're about to eat the flowers, my senior sister muttered softly to me. Don't worry. It'll work. Little girl, how much for these flowers? We'll take them. The two elders' faces were full of satisfaction and fondness. Even the flower pots, which were celadone glaze, were a treasure. They had to take both flowers home no matter what. My senior students gave me a hand signal. My senior brother was mouthing, $300,000, $300,000. I looked at the two gentle elders and smiled. Then I spoke clearly and distinctly, $30 million. The two elders paused, and then burst into laughter as they wrote the check. My senior students looked like they were in a dream. One of them had his senior sister pinch him. I smiled. I had planted a lot of good things on the mountain and medicinal field. As their granddaughter and grandniece, it was no more than asking for pocket money. In the end, my mother had no choice but to come clean and bring me back to the Shen family. Grandpa's, there are more good things. Next up will be our main works. But when it was time to show the silver thread peony, only petals covered the ground. The whole plant had been destroyed. The guests at the flower exhibition were all very influential people. The one who won the championship would have honor in this circle. I paused, thinking of the twin black lotus from before. My face darkened. Even worse, the monitoring system conveniently broke down. My brother and Sophie looked at me, full of gloating. They dared to play this game again. They even had people guarding the silver thread peony in Luoyang. Did they think I wouldn't take precautions? I only wanted to steal. The Su family's glory. The agricultural department came to the exhibition only to make a casual showing. I never imagined that Sophie would make the same mistake again. When I took out the miniature camera hidden under a leaf, Sophie and my brother's faces turned pale. The camera had clearly recorded Sophie plucking the silver thread peony and violently ripping off the petals. The guests were very important, and their eyes were not friendly when they looked at the Su family. Sophie looked at me with hatred. After a while, she stretched out her hand. Yo-yo, I didn't mean to do it. It was because you broke my ring first. That was my engagement ring with Mu-chan. She cried. I looked into my pocket. The tear of an angel was right there. So, she had come at me with everything she had. Sophie's eyes flickered. Let's ruin reputations together. It was all or nothing. Before I could speak, my grandfather stood up. My granddaughter's silver thread peony could buy countless of your fakes. Shen Yaoguang, the Shen family, could it be? I heard that the Shen CEO loved nature and liked to live like hermits with his wife. They never attend big events. Could it be? My grandfather and my great-uncle stepped down and said proudly, "This is my granddaughter and grandniece." Sophie was in disbelief. Why do you say my ring is fake? My grandfather looked at her, a cold glint in his eyes. The real one was bought by her grandmother 30 years ago and made into a necklace. He took out a box and inside was the tear of an angel. This is a gift from your grandmother. She asked me to give it to you today. My great-uncle also presented a pair of black jade earrings. This is what your grandmother prepared for you. I smiled sweetly at the two elders, whose eyes were full of love and support. Sophie and my brother wished they could disappear into the ground. Right and wrong was clear. Everyone looked at the two Su children with disdain. I'll pay you 10 diamonds like that, even though I have no idea how it got into my pocket. I hope that Ms. Su is responsible and will compensate me for my silver thread peony. I smiled. Foreign luxury items were okay, one could buy them if one gritted their teeth. But domestic luxury items were too expensive to buy. The Su family's reputation was completely ruined. When Sophie returned home, her parents didn't treat her well. My parents brought me back to the Shun and Lin families. I had my loving parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. The two elders and the Su family were too generous, there was too much money. My senior students and I researched and created many new species of plants. Academic awards poured in. Our team was known throughout China. My senior brother had even started research on animals and poultry. Later, Sophie married Mu-chan. My senior brother said that he could hear her screams every night. I frowned. Such a cruel and ruthless woman with a guy like Mu-chan, what a match made in hell. But I had underestimated Sophie's ruthlessness. Under Mu-chan's abuse, she became more and more delusional. My mother had never allowed her to eat her fill when she returned to the Su family, all for the sake of making her thin and delicate. In front of a man like Mu-chan, she had no power to resist. Mu-chan went too far, and Sophie could no longer endure it. She secretly hid a knife under her blanket. The next day, the servants found their bodies in a pool of blood. The Su family had completely offended the Mu family. The Mu family went after the Su family, causing the collapse of their finances, and they were forced to live in a tiny rental apartment. Even worse, my brother became addicted to gambling and borrowed a lot of money from loan sharks. He did not set fire to the mountain in this life. Instead, he set fire to their rental, which caused my parents to die. My brother, without any protection, would spend his whole life in jail. After hearing their story, I could only say one word: retribution. I looked up to the sky. Sophie was right. Fate is fair. Sophie had good parents, but she didn't know how to cherish them. If she had just tried a little harder, she could have lived the life of her dreams. Whether in the Su or Shin families, she needed to stay true to herself. Like a lotus, it grows out of the mud but is not stained, and though it washes the water clean, it's not seductive. The next year, the twin black jade lotus was finally cultivated. The black and white colors resembled the good and evil sides of humanity. I smiled. As long as one stays true to oneself, one can become as virtuous and fragrant as a lotus. When summer came, I couldn't help but return to my countryside home. My great-grandfather and grandfather were pleased to see that I had planted a lot of flowers and fruits in their old home. Plus I had created many new varieties, making them happy. Professor Jiang and my senior students squeezed into the small country home. Professor Jiang and the two elders spent every day together. The three old men seemed like they had finally found kindred spirits, as they enjoyed flowers, played chess, walked birds, and played cards together. My senior brother had almost been forced to inherit the Mu family's wealth. Thankfully, his father had many illegitimate children and didn't need him. He just wanted to peacefully do his research and cultivate delicious fungi and chicken with tender meat. The soil in the mountains was good, and the flowers bloomed well. Looking at the rainbow after the rain, it seemed to tell me that the storm had passed, and my future was bright. The end.